Well, we are delighted and privileged to be invited to give the opening presentation of this two-day event. Islands are incredibly special places. We all know this, and they've played a pivotal role in our understanding of ecology and evolution over the centuries. But right now, biodiversity data from islands plays an ever more important role in tackling the climate crisis and reversing the biodiversity crisis. So we're really keen to engage with you, to work with you to help make your biodiversity data have the greatest impact possible, both at local, national, and indeed international and global level. So this is the structure of, just advance the slides. This is roughly what we're going to cover in our presentation. I'm going to introduce the trust. I'm then going to briefly focus on connecting with the political landscape. So I've fully embraced the connection theme for the conference. Then connecting with the NBN community, connecting with recorders, and then I'm going to hand over to Sophie, who's going to talk about connecting data, the NBN Atlas, and connecting with you, the opportunities for engaging with you to help make your data work harder for nature. First of all, then, the NBN Trust. So the National Biodiversity Network Trust is a charity that was set up in the year 2000 to support and promote the collection, curation, sharing and use of UK biodiversity data. And the main means in which we do that is by facilitating the National Biodiversity Network, which is a network of more than 200 organisations all working together. And I'll say a little bit more about that on a following slide. Equally as importantly, we manage the NBN Atlas, a portal for sharing and accessing biodiversity data. We're also the UK node manager for GBIF, the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. And so we are the conduit for a huge amount of UK data to be accessible globally as well, which again, Sophie will tell you a little bit more about. As of April this year, we have taken on leadership of iNaturalist in the UK, and it would be great to think about how we could potentially engage you in the work we're doing to enhance how iNaturalist is utilised as a recording tool. And then finally, but in a way, the most important piece is that we champion data, recording, and the recording community. So we're out there influencing decision makers, influencing funders to help position our sector to support biodiversity data collection and sharing. First of all, then, in terms of the connections, connecting with the political landscape, I feel really optimistic at the moment that we might finally be seeing a meaningful transition from rhetoric to real action for conservation to address the biodiversity crisis and climate change. Not just the Leaders' Pledge for Nature, COP15, COP26, which of course all incredibly important for bumping these issues up the political agenda, but also the flurry of activity that there has been in the UK in the last couple of years with the Dasgupta review on the economics of biodiversity, the Environmental Audit Committee's report on biodiversity in the UK, the report to the Cabinet Office from the Geospatial Commission on England's species data pathway, and also the all-agency report Nature Positive 2030, which just came out a few weeks ago, which looks at how, excuse me, all of the statutory nature conservation bodies in the UK can work together to ensure nature's recovery. So it's a really critical time. There is an opportunity for our data, the data we manage, the data we look after, to play into all of the initiatives that are on the horizon, whether that relates to nature recovery networks, biodiversity net gain, protected areas, climate mitigation and adaptation, you name it. And so our data really are more important than ever, and we're really keen to work with you to make that impact happen. I wanted to say a little bit more about who the NBN community are and how we connect with them. So when the NBN was established, the founding partners were those organisations on the top line. So JNCC, Natural England, Natural History Museum, Biological Records Centre, RSPB, the Wildlife Trust, and the National Forum for Biological Recording. So all very familiar names to you all, I'm sure. The second line, including the Association of Local Environmental Record Centres, were the early adopters, and including the Marine Biological Association as well. And then beyond that, we have a huge membership of charities spanning from large national charities to small local charities. We have recording schemes, national schemes and societies, from the Mammal Society to CSearch. I know Angus from CSearch is speaking next. We have biological record centres. We've got Guernsey Biological Record Centre as a member. Bodies like the Field Studies Council, academic institutions, utilities companies in some cases, and other private sector bodies that have an interest in biodiversity. So it's a really huge community representing, whilst not the entire biodiversity data sector, certainly a really significant portion of it. And we're looking to grow our membership to make it more fully representative and inclusive of the sector in the next few years. And so we sit at the centre of this really active and vibrant network, sharing information, sharing ideas about biodiversity data. And as well as regular ongoing comms, newsletters and the like, our flagship activity in that regard is the NBN conference, which conveniently is coming up. So I'll give a quick plug. It's 24th of November. It's online as well, unfortunately. And there's a really good range of presentations, from transforming DEFRA families' investment in England's biological data infrastructure, Recorder 6, sharing records globally, eDNA, precision citizen science, and more. So I'd strongly encourage you to come along to the conference. There's a discount for members of the NBN, so you might want to sign up as well and get your membership, but it's a very reasonably priced conference anyway, and I hope to see many of you there. On to connecting with the recording community. Now, as a network-based charity, with most of our members being organisations, most of our connection with individual recorders happens through the organisations with which they engage at a local or a national level. However, there are exceptions to that. So we do, have individuals who come along, individual recorders who come along to the NBN conference, who sign up to our various communications. And having taken on the leadership of iNaturalist in the UK, there's an opportunity for us to connect more directly with the recording community, which is something that we're really excited about. You may be of interest to know that we've recently set up an iNaturalist UK user group, because we're really keen to identify the opportunities and the challenges that iNaturalist brings to the recording setup in the UK and beyond, and how we can make the very best of iNaturalist whilst minimising the issues associated, for example, with the proliferation of recording platforms and how we signpost recorders to the platform that's going to be most suitable for their needs. So if you'd be interested in joining the user group or signing up to the communications associated with it, please do get in touch, and we'd be delighted to get you involved in that. So that's my introduction, and I'm now going to hand over to Sophie to talk to you further about connecting through data, and specifically the NBN Atlas. And I'm going to carry on being her, I'm going to be her slide changer so that we don't have to faff around with sharing and unsharing and all of that. So forgive me for any delays that introduces. So Sophie, over to you.
Hello, good morning. So yes, I'm going to talk about the NBN Atlas and the records that we have on it. So the Atlas is the UK's repository for biodiversity and species occurrence records. It was launched in April 2017 to replace the NBN Gateway, which was the previous data portal. As you can see from this heat map, the Atlas covers an area wider than the UK. We have records for the Isle of Man and also Channel Islands, and records excuse me, from the Republic of Ireland. Those records tend to be, records from the Republic of Ireland tend to be all island data sets. So where the data provider wanted to keep the context of the data set. So data sets, we've got a lichen and a dragonfly all island data set. The dataset sizes, they range from very small 6-10 records from small organisations such as wildlife trusts to larger datasets in several millions from the BSBI and the UK Butterfly Monitoring Scheme to really large datasets of 25 million from BTO. 26% of the records on the Atlas have an open license, and that means there's no restriction to use them, but the dataset, the data provider, must be acknowledged or cited, and all the records on the Atlas must be licensed individually. They also must all have an identification verification status, and 90% of the records on the Atlas have a confirmed identification. At least that's what the data provider has told us. That's what it's been assigned on the record. We use the UK Species Inventory as the species dictionary on the Atlas. It's managed by the Natural History Museum in London, and all taxon names are matched to names within the UKSI. And at the bottom, we've just got a few photos of species that have recently been recorded and uploaded onto the Atlas. And we've had a couple of big insect data sets updated, which is why there's a focus on insects there. The next slide shows where our who our data providers are. And we can see that almost half of our data providers or data partners are environmental conservation NGOs, people like the People's Trust for Endangered Species or the National Trust. We also have a large number of LERCs, the local environmental record centres, share their records with us, and also many, many national schemes and societies. We actually have more national schemes and societies than the pie graph suggests, because many host their records on the Biological Record Centre's data provider page. That's just how they choose to share their records. But we do have a growing number of wildlife trusts sharing records, and also museums, botanical gardens, as they digitise their natural history collections. The next slide shows the number of records by the classification of the data provider. We can see that almost 2/3 of our records come from the national schemes and societies. These are the really large data sets from the BTO, BSBI, Butterfly Conservation. But we also have a significant number of records from the local environmental record centres. There are several that share more than 2 million records in their data sets. The next slide is our attempt at trying to understand the flow of data and records within the NBN, and specifically in and out of the NBN Atlas. And I'm really happy to go through this slide in more detail at another time. There's not so much time, but what I wanted to take away from this slide is to highlight the automatic transfer of records that we have from the biological record centres to the NBN Atlas. We have a monthly flow of data from them. And that's really records from national schemes and societies and projects that use the Indithia warehouse. We also take all data sets from the Marine Biological Association's archive, the DASH archive for marine species and habitats data. So at the moment we have all of their data sets that they've published from 2019 onwards, but they also then take our records as well. So avoiding those that we've taken from them. But as you can see, there is quite a movement of data around the NBN. And we also share records with the Global Biodiversity Information Forum, as Lisa mentioned earlier. And so the GBIF, if you go to the next slide, this is just a screenshot of the GBIF homepage. It's an international network and data infrastructure that's funded by the world's governments. And it provides access to species and taxon data, occurrence data from across the globe using biodiversity, but using standard data standards, which the Atlas also adheres to. The next slide shows a heat map of those records on GBIF, and you can see that there's a real hotspot for Europe and especially the British Isles. We share almost 50% of the records from the NBN Atlas with GBIF. They also receive records directly from other organisations within the UK. And so we don't share records that we know are already shared with GBIF, such as those from the Marine Biological Association. And we also have data providers who ask not to share records, but there are very few of those. And I think the UK contributes the second largest number of records to GBIF. The United States of America contributes more. So what's the benefit of sharing records on GBIF? When you add a data set on GBIF, GBIF assigns it a DOI, which is a domain name identifier. It's a URL, a unique ID for that data set. And that allows people who publish reports, publications, any documentation using those records to cite that DOI. And that allows GBIF and others to track those citations, so that we can assess the impact of those records, who's using your records and for what reason. And the next slide shows the number of peer-reviewed citations, or citations for peer-reviewed publications on data sets from the NBN Atlas that we've shared with GBIF. And you can see that there's a steady increase in the number of citations from the records from the NBN Atlas. And these are just peer-reviewed citations. There's many more working papers and other publications that have not been through the peer review process. And I'll come back to that, to GBIF, in a moment. I wanted to show you a case study of the Isle of Man, which on the next slide. The Isle of Man NBN Atlas was launched in April 2018. And it's managed by the Manx Biological Recording Partnership, who contribute the largest number of records to the data portal. Those records that are on the Isle of Man portal also exist in the main NBN Atlas. So the Isle of Man portal is a cookie cutter. It's those set of records that fall in the Isle of Man and her terrestrial waters. So we also, Isle of Man, the BTO and the Manx Natural Heritage contribute a lot of records to the Isle of Man portal, and the Manx Natural Heritage has an interesting data set of daily log bird observations from the Calf of Man, and this dates back to 1959, and they have a team of volunteers digitising these records and have been updating the data set monthly since we launched, as those records are validated, and those have contributed to reaching 1 million, or now over 1 million records from the Isle of Man. And I think they achieved 1 million records at this time last year. And we've got some pictures at the bottom as well of records recently, of species recently recorded on the Isle of Man. And you can see that it's not just Isle of Man data providers. There are 57 data partners in total who contribute records to the Isle of Man. So that the reach is wider than the Isle of Man. On the next slide, you can see I wanted to talk about back to GBIF, because the Manx Biological Recording Group and the Manx Natural Heritage, they publish their records on GBIF via us. And this page is a screenshot from GBIF, which just shows the first 3 most recent publications that have cited data used from the Isle of Man. And there are actually 295 publications, both peer-reviewed and not, that have used records from Manx Biological Recording Group. And if you look at the next slide, we can see this is a breakdown of the country or area of researcher, of the lead researcher for those publications. And we can see that the reach is far beyond the UK and the Isle of Man. The United States and Germany have more researchers using this data set. But there's also a long list of other countries with researchers that have accessed and cited the Manx Biological Recording Group's data set. So the outreach is huge, especially once the the records are on GBIF. And for the last slide, I wanted just to come back to the Channel Islands and just show a view of the records that we have on the Channel Islands. From the Channel Islands on the NBN Atlas. We have 4 Channel Island specific data sets from Sea Search, from the Conchological Society. They have both marine and non-marine records, and the Earthworm Society of Great Britain. They have a data set of 100 records from the Channel Islands, and they update those records annually. So there's 16 other organisations from across the UK that share their records with the Channel Islands. The majority of these are marine records, including records from the Marine Biological Association and the Porcupine Natural History Society. But the largest data set by far is from Sea Search, with records in the Channel Islands starting from 1997. And again, some photos at the bottom of species that have been recorded recently in the Channel Islands and uploaded to the NBN Atlas. I just wanted to quickly say thank you to Malcolm Story and David Fenwick, who I've used their images on the presentation. They are recorders who share their records with the NBN Atlas, and they also very kindly share some of their images, their photos as well. And that's the end of the presentation. Thank you so much for inviting us. It's been really good to go through the Atlas with you. And if you would like a demonstration of the Atlas, if you've got any other questions, especially on data flow and licensing, please let us know. Thank you.